Hello, friends. Ready for another story? So excited. I'm thinking to myself right now, how great would it be if I could go outside and have this sky rain down my breakfast and rain down my lunch and dinner and some ice cream for dessert. How crazy would that be if you just had to walk out your door and there was your meal? And you didn't have to do dishes, you didn't have to prepare any food or go grocery shopping. What a crazy world would that be? Well, our characters in our story today live in such a place where they don't have grocery stores, they don't have the need for dishwashers, they just get to step outside and voila, their meal is right where they need it to be. How crazy is that? So today we are reading Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. Now, who has heard this story? I know this is such a great story, and it's even a movie, so maybe after this story is done, you'll feel the need to go watch that movie. I know I might. I love that movie. So let's get started. This is always a fun one. Always fun to think of what kind of world would that be like if you just got rained down your food every day. All right, let's get started. Get cozied in. We were all sitting around the big kitchen table. It was Saturday morning, pancake morning. Mom was squeezing oranges for juice. Henry and I were betting on how many pancakes we each could eat, and Grandpa was doing the flipping. Get that picture in there. That sounds like such a good morning. Fresh squeezed orange juice, pancakes. Yes, please. Seconds later, something flew through the air and headed toward the kitchen ceiling and landed right on Henry. After we realized that the flying object was only a pancake, we all laughed, even Grandpa. Breakfast continued quite uneventfully. All the other pancakes landed in the pan, and all of them were eaten. Even the one that landed on Henry. What would you think if your grandpa was flipping pancakes and all of a sudden one landed on top of your head? I'd probably laugh too. That's kind of silly. That night, touched off by the pancake incident at breakfast, Grandpa told us the best tall tale bedtime story he'd ever told. Across an ocean, over lots of huge bumpy mountains, across 3 hot deserts and 1 smaller ocean, there lay the tiny town of Chewandswallow. What a silly name for a place. Chewandswallow. And my friends know I do these recordings live, so if you hear outside, I'm so sorry, I apologize, but you get these stories real life, real time. In most ways, it was very much like any other tiny town. It had a main street lined with stores, houses with trees and gardens around them, a schoolhouse, about 300 people, and some assorted cats and dogs. But there were no food stores in the town of Chewandswallow. They didn't need any. The sky supplied all the food they could possibly want. The only thing that was really different about Chewandswallow was its weather. It came 3 times a day. At breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Everything that everyone ate came from the sky. Such a nice little town. Whatever the weather served, that was what they ate. So you couldn't really be a picky eater in this town, could you? But it never rained rain. It never snowed snow, and it never blew just wind. It rained things like soup and juice. It snowed mashed potatoes and green beans. And sometimes the wind blew in storms of hamburgers. Oh my goodness. Look at that crazy food weather. I can't imagine. The people could watch the weather report on television in the morning, and they would even hear a prediction for the next day's food. When the townspeople went outside, they carried their plates, cups, glasses, forks, spoons, knives, and napkins with them. That way, they would always be prepared for any kind of weather. If there were leftovers, and there usually were, the people took them home and put them in their refrigerators in case they got hungry between meals. So I guess they might have to do some dishes, huh? But still, that is not a bad deal. All the food you could ever want. The menu varied. By the time they woke up in the morning, breakfast was coming down. After a brief shower of orange juice, low clouds of sunny-side-up eggs moved in, followed by pieces of toast. Butter and jelly sprinkled down for the toast, and most of the time it rained milk afterwards. For lunch one day, frankfurters are already in their rolls blew in from the northwest at about 5 miles an hour. There were mustard clouds nearby, then the wind shifted to the east and brought in baked beans. A drizzle of soda finished off the meal. So this weather thinks of everything. You get your food, your beverages, your condiments. How cool is that? Dinner one night consisted of lamb chops, becoming heavy at times with occasional ketchup. Periods of peas and baked potatoes were followed by a gradual clearing with a wonderful jello sitting in the west. The sanitation department of Chewandswallow had a rather unusual job for a sanitation department. It had to remove the food that fell on the houses and sidewalks and lawns. The workers cleaned things up after every meal and fed all the dogs and cats. Then they emptied some of it into the surrounding oceans for the fish and turtles and whales to eat. The rest of the food was put back into the earth so that the soil would be richer for the people's flower gardens. I love how they make sure to use every bit of that food. Doesn't sound like they waste any, which I love to hear. They make sure all their animals are fed. So great. Life for the townspeople was delicious until the weather took a turn for the worse. One day there was nothing but gorgonzola cheese all day long. Can you imagine? The next day there was only broccoli, all overcooked. And the next day there were Brussels sprouts and peanut butter with mayonnaise. Ooh, that sounds yucky. Another day there was a pea soup fog. No one could see where they were going, and they could barely find the rest of the meal that got stuck in the fog. This all sounds awful. What is happening in their silly little town? The food was getting larger and larger, and so were the portions. The people were getting frightened. Violent storms blew up frequently. Awful things were happening. One Tuesday, there was a hurricane of bread and rolls all day long and into the night. There were soft rolls and hard rolls, some with seeds and some without. There was white bread and rye and whole wheat toast. Most of it was larger than they had ever seen bread and rolls before. It was a terrible day. Everyone had to stay indoors. Roofs were damaged, and the sanitation department was beside itself. The mess took the workers 4 days to clean up, and the sea was full of floating rolls. I'd want to stay inside too. Can you imagine getting hit over the head with one of those huge rolls? To help out, the people piled up as much bread as they could in their backyards. The birds picked at it a bit, but it just stayed there and got staler and staler. So it's getting really hard. There was a storm of pancakes one morning and a downpour of maple syrup that nearly flooded the town. That would be a very sticky flood. A huge pancake covered the school. No one could get it off because of its weight, so they had to close the school. Oh my word, look at the size of that pancake. Whew. Lunch one day brought 15-inch drifts of cream cheese and jelly sandwiches. Everyone ate themselves sick, and the day ended with a stomach ache. There was an awful salt and pepper wind accompanied by an even worse tomato tornado. People were sneezing themselves silly and running to avoid the tomatoes. The town was a mess. There were seeds and pulp everywhere. This is sounding awful. It was so nice in the beginning. I don't know what happened. Weather is very unpredictable, even for us. The sanitation department gave up. The job was too big. Everyone feared for their lives. They couldn't go outside most of the time. Many houses had been badly damaged by giant meatballs. Stores were boarded up, and there was no more school for the children. So a decision was made to abandon the town of Chewandswallow. It was a matter of survival. Oh my goodness, look at all this craziness happening. That poor man right here has a noodle on his head. Oh my word. The people glued together the giant pieces of stale bread sandwich style with peanut butter, took the absolute necessities with them, and set sail on their rafts for a new land. So they're like, bye. This is too scary. We gotta see if we can find a new place to live. Look how clever they are using that stale bread. So smart. So innovative. After being afloat for a week, they finally reached a small coastal town, which welcomed them. The bread had held up surprisingly well enough for them to build temporary houses for themselves out of it. The children began school again, and the adults all tried to find places for themselves in the new land. The biggest change they had to make was getting used to buying food at a supermarket. They found it odd that the food was kept on shelves, packaged in boxes, cans, and bottles. Meat that had to be cooked was kept in large refrigerators. Nothing came down from the sky except rain and snow. The clouds above their heads were not made of fried eggs. No one ever got hit by a hamburger again, and nobody dared to go back to Chewandswallow to find out what had happened to it. They were too afraid. Henry and I were awake until the very end of Grandpa's story. I remember his goodnight kiss. I love again how resourceful they are with using that bread, not just as boats, but as little houses. It's so great. The next morning, we woke up to see snow falling outside our window. We ran downstairs for breakfast and ate it a little faster than usual so we could go sledding with Grandpa. It's funny, but even as we were sliding down the hill, we thought we saw a giant pat of butter at the top, and we could almost smell mashed potatoes. So look at that mound of snow. It kind of could look like a pile of mashed potatoes with a little yellow butter on top. The end. Let me get that picture. Okay, you know what might be fun, friends? And I might even do this. It's so crazy to think about the movie from this book because they're so different. So if you know of the movie Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, go watch it and see how different it is from the story. Sometimes books and stories, even though they have the same name, can tell a story in two totally different ways, and it's so fun to kind of see how that can happen. And that's why it's so cool to read the book and see the movie, because you get something really different from both each time. I love it. So thank you for showing up today and for sharing in this story. I see a lot of you. Hi, friends. And join me for our next one. It's going to be a great one because it kind of continues our story that we read today, which will be really fun. So we are going to be able to see what happened to that little place of Chewandswallow. So definitely tune in for our next story. Have a great rest of your day, friends. I'll see you next time.